Hi Saskia. Welcome here. It's a pleasure to have you here today. How are you?
Great to meet you, Michele. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Nice, nice. First of all, do you want to give us a little bit of your background, your professional experience, where you're coming from?
Absolutely, sure. I mean, my background is originally, I was a, let's say, boring management consultant or recovering management consultant, as I sometimes say. Worked at one of the large consultancies first in Germany and then later in New York. And then about
Mhm.
15 years ago, I met Muhammad Yunus from Bangladesh, the
Mm,
Peace Nobel laureate, who invented the whole idea of microcredit, so small loans for poor women
mm,
in developing countries for them to build their own businesses. And with him, I started a company together called Yunus Social Business, investing in social businesses in the global south. And just recently, I helped build, I'm building Carbon Equity, which is
mm,
a climate tech investing platform that allows individuals to invest in the top climate tech funds worldwide and thereby makes individuals sort of actors in this important green transition that we really need in Europe, all around the world, and makes them active participants in this. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. So before to go to carbon equity, that would be the focus of your experience. I would like to deep dive a little bit on Yunus Social. It seems like very interesting, and I heard a lot about small lending and small businesses, mostly in certain kind of area in the East Africa, Latin America, also in India. So I wanted to for you to share a little bit of your experience in that area.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, basically 15 years ago, the idea of combining both business and solving social problems were very separate. Like people were
Mm,
like, well, either you do business and you make money for your shareholders and it's all about
yeah.
profit maximization, because I guess that's what we all learned in business school. And or on the other hand, you do something social or something for the
Mm,
environment, and then you do that in an NGO format or you do it in the format of a government. And so what we did at Uno Social Business was to basically combine those two worlds. Like,
mhm,
you take the aims of the nonprofit and government world to say like we want to solve problems, but take
mhm,
the means, the efficiency and the power of business to actually solve it. And that together basically is the concept of social business, solving problems, but through a business model. And Yunus, obviously, in his work over the last decades in Bangladesh, has proven that social business is not a cute little concept that works, improve three people's lives, but he's actually clearly shown through microfinance and many of the other social businesses that he's created in fields like healthcare, fighting environmental problems, job creation, etc., that he can impact through a business model the lives of millions of people in his
mhm,
home country, Bangladesh. And the work that we did together at Uno Social Business was to bring those successful models from Bangladesh to other countries. And we funded local entrepreneurs in countries like Colombia, in Brazil,
mm,
in Uganda, Rwanda, in India, and in many other places to build those types of problem solving businesses. And
mhm,
and I think that was for me an important eye opener to the world, right? Like that these
mm,
things can actually be combined, and that in some ways we can use the power of capitalism for society. And to be honest, it's the exact same thinking at carbon equity. How can we use the
mhm,
power of the market? How can we use the power of investors and of businesses to solve the largest generational problem that we have right now,
mm,
namely climate change? And we see it not just as the largest generational problem, but we see it as the generational investment opportunity
yeah.
that, both solves the problem and at the same time also makes money for the shareholders in this transition. And so it's just an extension of the same thinking that I've had over the last 15 years. There it was more focused on poverty alleviation
Mm.
specifically, and now it's focused on this very important topic of climate.
Mm. So let's go back to climate then. Decarbonization has always been one of the main holy grail, I would say, of this kind of impact investing. do you think we are actually able to achieve something like that, to achieve a technology that is actually able to decarbonize and having an impact using this kind of investing strategy?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. I mean, like one of our cultural values at Carbon Equity is yes, we can solve climate change. So it's a little bit Obama mixed with like
Yeah.
environmental activism. We fundamentally believe that it's possible.
Mm.
If you think about it, of the technologies that are necessary to get to net zero, the big majority is already there and actually
Mm.
already works at a significant scale. So think solar, wind, battery technologies, they're really working at scale and are actually in energy. It's more affordable than traditional fossil fuels in like the big majority of the cases worldwide. So you can
Mm-hmm.
see that is possible to both solve the problem and do it in a profitable and cost effective and actually even cheaper way. So there we've already proven that it's possible. And then there are, of course, still some technologies that we have figured out. So we know pretty much all the
Mm-hmm.
technologies, just not all of them already work at that kind of commercial scale than solar and wind that I just described. And so there the challenge is to move them from where they are right now, early commercialization or even still in the lab, to move them to actually move them to functioning at scale and without any green premium, but eventually moving them to a green premium is obviously the concept of having to pay more
Mm-hmm.
because it's a green product rather
Yeah.
than a traditional product, and moving that to a green discount eventually, just like we've already seen in solar already happening. And that's the challenge that we have and that we
Mm.
see and that we all need to work on. So long story short, it is possible. We know it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's a question of us, A, deploying the capital into that space at scale, and that's what we want to do at Carbon Equity.
Mm-hmm.
And B, it's of course continuing the entrepreneurial journey of those people that have invented those incredible technologies, and then we can actually make it happen.
Hmm. No, I think I have many multiple questions. So what you just said. So the first one would be about, that kind of green premium factor that you were mentioning. I think that we can see that in the automotive industry at the moment. 5, 10 years ago, we had electric cars with a very high premium price tag, and we are now seeing that kind of prices going down and those kind of cars being more affordable. But that kind of market is still very complex and it's not that easy actually to get normal people or common people to actually believe that that is the future, that they for just them to want, for example, an electric car. How do you think we can solve this kind of problem in the market? Because probably there will be similar kind of attitudes in other markets that are impacted by this factor.
But I actually find that EVs or electric vehicles is actually a beautiful additional example of where
Hmm.
commercialization at scale has actually functioned. Because
Yeah.
if you think about it, China last year had the first time where more electric vehicles went
Hmm.
to the market and were sold to people than traditional internal combustion engines.
Thermic vehicle. Yeah.
So that's an example. Like they're not all rich in China. They're not all
Hmm.
idealistic. They're just seeing this is what the future is. That's what's the price for my BYD, I don't know, electric car.
Hmm.
That's the best solution. I'm going to take that. And for me, that's an incredible example of showing electric vehicles do work at scale. We can do it. If China can do it, uh, why shouldn't other markets be able to do the exact same thing? Of course, that requires, next to the buying decision, like a good infrastructure,
Yeah.
so people can load their cars. The battery life needs to be long enough so people don't get annoyed halfway through their vacation, etc. Like, of course, there's things around that need to happen. But I think, I mean, in Europe, we're making significant progress. In China, we're already there.
Yeah.
So it's again another example that it is possible.
Mm. And coming back to the second part of your topic, so an important factor is for the commercialization to be possible and for the technology to have an impact, of course. But the other side is also to let those people, those founders, to be able to impact with their companies and also to have the capital to scale up. How are you actually helping them to do it from an investor perspective?
Yeah. Well, we set up carbon equity with various observations. One of them,
Mm-hmm.
or with various hypotheses really behind it. One of them being currently most people don't have access to the most important climate companies out there. They can't invest in them. So if you think about it, it's something like 90% of the climate related innovations and companies right now
Mm-hmm.
are not on the stock exchange. So 90% of those companies are funded by venture capital, perhaps private equity, and those that are, let's say, further advanced by infrastructure
Yeah.
funders. However, these types of funding are not accessible for, let's say, normal people, or let's say what we
Mm.
call mass affluent people in more technical talk, because mass affluent investors tend to not have access to venture capital, private equity,
Mm-hmm.
and infrastructure. And if they have access, they might just have access because, oh, they happen to know the guy that runs a venture capital fund around the corner, and they have they can invest. But typically, like the top venture capital funds and private equity funds are oversubscribed. You
Yeah.
need to, invest multiple millions to even get in, if they aren't already oversubscribed, and therefore, and then you're only in one fund. So it's quite hard for people to access this sector. So again, summarizing, 90% of the climate companies are funded by private equity and venture capital and infrastructure, but 90% of those investors don't have access. They
Yeah.
mainly have access to, let's say, stock exchange, to the public
Mm-hmm.
stock exchange, to publicly listed equities, but they're not really able to invest in those relevant companies. So that is the reason why carbon equity exists, because we want to bridge that gap between these 90% of these climate companies and the 90% of the investors that
Mm.
want to invest. And thereby we're able to catalyze a new type of capital that currently isn't part of this positive green industrial transition that we all want to see. That's
Mm.
the reason why we exist in the first place. So
Okay.
make it
Mhm.
one step now concrete. What does this look like? At Carbon Equity, we build on an annual basis. We build a portfolio of somewhere between
Mm.
7 to 10 funds, where we pick the best funds from our research from around the world, from the 500 climate tech funds that are out there. We give our clients or our investors access to these wonderful funds, and thereby give them incredible diversification across something like roughly 150 companies.
Mm.
So in some ways, we've created a product where our investors can have access to investing in climate technologies and be part of the solution. B, they can make a ton of money because these are the
Mm-hmm.
types of asset classes where, the large institutional investors are also making a lot of money. And three, they can sleep well at night because we have this instant diversification across so many different funds, so many
Yeah.
different countries, stages, companies, etc., that it is a little bit like almost like an ETF, but for
Mm-hmm.
private markets, that we sort of pre-select for our clients. So it's sort of the best of all these three worlds.
Mm. It's a very interesting concept because the concept of having an ETF about different kind of funds or different kind of startups is frequently coming to the market in the startup ecosystem. I have a follow-up question on this one. So you choose the funds or you choose the company where you want to invest in, and likely, of course, also the fund that is owning them. So I wanted to understand if you are choosing more the funds or the startup under that point of view.
Mainly, we pick the funds. So in our
Okay.
typical, let's say, annual vintage that we're currently running right now, 80% we invest in funds, and
Mm,
20% we have the ability to invest in direct companies. Always that our
okay.
underlying funds also invest in those. So we're able to sort of pick from the 150 companies that are in any given portfolio. We can pick the very best and also make direct
Mm.
investments alongside. So it's like an 80-20 approach.
Oh, it's interesting. And how do you actually choose a fund? I mean, you have the usual, KPI and the variables. You have the rate of return, you have the cost, all of those kind of things, of course. But how do you actually choose a fund? Is more a strategic perspective, so trying to understand the technology, the investment thesis, or it's more a qualitative side, maybe, trying to understand their vision and what they want to do in the market?
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of different factors that we look at. And I think different than most typical LPs in that sense, we basically want to optimize both for the financial return as well as for the
Mm-hmm.
climate impact. And so we look at
Okay.
those two things. So we basically have a process. I don't want to bore you with the details, but basically we have a process that looks at both of those sides with an equal weight. And in general, I think so. We have both the financial side as well as the climate side that can also, in the investment committee, veto and say we don't believe in this deal. So,
Okay.
so I think that is a very unique characteristic of the way that we select our investments. And now, if you think about it, we're trying to basically decarbonize the 59 gigatons that we emit as humanity across all the different sectors. So from energy to transport to industry to, well, let's say, of course, the carbon management sector. All those various sectors we try to invest in. So what we try and create in any like annual vintage, any annual portfolio, is a good mix of all the different parts in sort of the climate, like that actually drive carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
We want to have a good mix of earlier stage, growth stage, later stage companies. And we want a good regional diversification. So that also the portfolio's constellation also makes an important thing. But basically, just coming back to the original question of like how do we select? We of course want to see, is the general mandate of that fund one that has an intention to actually, maximize profits and climate impact. We want to look at the team. We want to understand if their investment thesis is aligned with our logic. We want to actually see their climate track record. What is their climate track record before? We typically don't invest in first-time funds unless they have a very significant angel track record beforehand. But we try to avoid that because, again, we want to create a product that people can sleep well at night. And of course, we understand also the benefits of first-time funds. We're aware of that, but that's the decision that we've taken unless we, are really super convinced.
Yeah.
So in exceptions. So yeah, so these are a couple of those dimensions that we look at. But if anyone ever wants to really go into the details, we can present all the different steps. But this gives you a little bit the bigger picture.
No, no, it makes a lot of sense. But maybe deep diving a little bit more on the market itself. Which are the technologies that you think are disrupting this market most? We always been talking about solar, wind, of course, electric cars and everything, but I'm pretty sure that there are other kind of technologies out there that are impacting the market that are maybe a little bit less known, that are more, a niche kind of technology. But which are the one that you think will be impacting the market the most in the upcoming years?
But I think right now everyone's really talking about energy
Hmm.
because energy and geopolitical energy independence, both in the US as well as in Europe, are massive topics at this
Yeah.
stage for the various geopolitical issues and reasons that I think we're all aware of. And so within energy, next to the areas like that you already mentioned, like solar, batteries, wind, etc. I think what we're seeing, growing significantly is geothermal, because
Mm.
that's another base load energy. So other than other renewable energies, it doesn't have the intermittency where um, energy goes up and down depending on how much wind or sun there
Yeah.
is. But it's actually stable. I think
It's more constant. Yeah.
that's, for example, a very interesting area. Of course, what we're also seeing is maybe not in Germany as much in my own home country, but in many other countries, the whole topic of new nuclear.
Mm.
So, new nuclear reactors, there's even hope that nuclear fission is actually not as far away as we all thought,
Yeah.
but that is actually making a significant drive. So basically, new types of baseload energies that are renewable are certainly, very hip these days,
Mhm.
and could really be significant breakthroughs in these upcoming years.
Yeah, I think that nuclear energy is one of the most interesting topic recently coming to the energy side. I was recently reading about the news of the thorium-based reactor launched in China, based on the discovery that they made about this huge amount of thorium stored in the country. And I think that that one, along as other kind of news like the Tomahawk reactor that has been running recently, the Tomahawk project, are really driving the attention on the market itself. Mostly in Europe, there are certain kind of countries. Italy is one of them, but there are also other that historically disliked the nuclear energy. I think that this kind of misconception is actually changing a little bit right now. Do you actually believe that nuclear energy will be the future under that point of view, or maybe more geothermal energy and other kind of renewable?
Well, the truth is, Michaela, I don't know. I mean, nuclear is one of those
Makes sense.
topics that, is so emotional.
Mm.
Just like I think in general, we've seen too much political engagement in the whole topic of climate. Is it now
Yeah.
climate? What should we call it, etc. I think like there are many emotional topics that have been politicized and have been
Hmm.
creating polarization. Nuclear is unfortunately one of those examples where you can't just talk about the rational facts, but it's like
Yeah.
either you're for it or you're against it. At least, for
Yeah.
example, in my country, in Germany, it's very emotional.
Hmm.
So therefore, I don't know if indeed, like, to create change in society, it's not only about having the best technological solution. It's also to create the buy-in in society that
Mm.
that's the solution we're now going to go for. And political buy-in and also broader societal buy-in are probably just as important a key success factor than the technological readiness is.
Yeah.
So therefore, I can't give you that answer. I mean, I
Hmm.
see we have a number of those types of, new nuclear companies, but also geothermal companies across our portfolio that are doing really, really well.
Mm.
But in the end, of course, the political environment, the regulatory environment will make a difference as well if those companies actually are successful in the long run. And yeah, the jury is still out on that one.
No, it makes sense. I mean, it's a very political topic, I would say, mostly in certain countries. But I strongly agree on that one. It's very hard for people to judge emotionless on this topic, and it's not an easy topic to manage. Let's say, coming back from
Maybe
to
just
your
one more thing on that whole political side. I mean, I think in general, we need to, with everything related to climate, energy transition, you name it, whatever, the food transition, we need to de-emotionalize it. We need to
yeah.
depoliticize it. And we need to just focus on the facts and what are the good solutions, because otherwise we're not going to make that next step that is necessary right now because the
I
situation.
strongly agree on this one. To be honest, I think that there are certain kind of topics that should be addressed only with data and kind of a scientific approach. And having them political makes absolutely no sense at all. But we are an emotional species, let's say, so it's very hard for us to not get emotional about things.
Yeah.
But coming back to your, let's say, investor side and your investor experience, you said that 20% of the funds that you allocate are going directly into startups, so directly into founders and companies. How do you actually choose them? So I want to understand a little bit better if you are, of course, coming from the fund themselves. It's actually a big topic. It's actually a big factor. But I wanted to understand how do you actually choose the funders that you want directly backing into? Maybe it's more the technical side. Is the kind of approach that they have? Is the technology itself that is driving you? Why do you choose to invest directly into a company?
Um, I mean, we have a certain number of criteria of how
Of
we want,
course.
how those companies should be performing, like how
Hmm.
profitable or not they should already be, etc. But basically, in some ways, we have an unfair advantage to, let's say, a typical investor, because for any given direct investment that we make, we usually have the information of at least one of our GP funds, if not two of our GP funds, and sometimes even more, because we're investor in the funds. So the funds are willing to also share with us the information about their individual portfolio companies, because we, of course, look at them when we due diligence the individual fund. So we have that information available, and they're also willing to help us, have that deal flow. So for us, we're able to, from the wealth of knowledge of our underlying GP funds, we can cherry pick the very best deals. And so basically, we just ask our GPs, which are the best deals, which are the ones that you see a lot of potential in. We, of course, do our own homework as well, but we usually already have a very good database to build it on. And so that's how we're able to make those, very good bets, and invest in companies, with this very unfair advantage. And I think that is important for the overall performance of our portfolio funds, because we basically have, for the broad diversification, we're across the 8 to 10 climate tech funds at different stages. And for the financial performance, we basically don't have to pay fees on those direct, the 20% direct deals that we invest
Makes
in.
sense.
And that, of course, increases significantly the financial performance of our fund. So it's a really good mix, and therefore we are able to offer a really, really great product to our end customers. In the end, we're able to have an investor grade product, so one that big institutional investors would be interested in investing, and we offer it next to the large investors. We offer it also to small investors, even already starting at 20,000 euros. So and an investment grade product offered to retail investors. That doesn't happen very
Lowering down the barriers, to democratize those kind of investments.
exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. Coming back to something you just said. So why don't you invest a little bit more directly on the companies, given the fact that you're not paying the fee? It's just out of pure curiosity, of course. But given the fact that you're not paying the fees on them, for the funds, why don't you invest more on them?
Well, Michele, there might be at the end of this year a co-investment fund coming about
Oh,
that,
nice.
we might be planning, but given that it's not official yet, I don't really know
Okay.
much about it. And I think
Perfect.
we'll hear more about it towards the end of this year. Because indeed, a lot of our family office investors have asked for more of those investments. But again, we don't have that. There's some steps that we need to take. But,
Okay.
I might be able to surprise you towards the end of
Okay.
this year.
Nice. So it was going in the right direction. Okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah,
At
yeah.
least
You,
that's
you know, as if you had known, as if I had given you a hint, which I haven't.
perfect. Perfect. Nice. I discovered by myself. Great.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Nice. Very, very nice. Um, Now, I wanted to, let's say, deep dive a little bit more on the technology themselves. So I was wondering, given the fact that you probably see many of them, and energy is obviously a greatest part of the kind of topic and the kind of focus that you have on your side. I was wondering about another very important topic that is going on right now in the energy sector, that is about decarbonizing the atmosphere at the moment. So there's a huge segment of startup trying to lower down the amount of CO2 that we emit, of course, but there's also another segment that is trying to take it off the CO2 from the atmosphere, the one that we already emitted. So I wanted to understand if you are seeing the same trend and if you believe that this kind of technology will actually have an impact on our lifetime.
Absolutely. I mean, the truth is, to be able to reach our targets until 2050, we will need both climate technologies that use less or use zero carbon, or basically zero carbon technologies. And we will also need technologies that are carbon negative, so that take carbon out of the atmosphere. Nature is, by the way, one of them. We need to ensure that, for example, the oceans, the forests, etc., are continuously taking up the CO2 that we're producing every year. But we will, next to that, also have carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture and utilization technologies that add to this, because they're necessary to get to net zero, because even once we're at net zero, let's say we
Mm-hmm.
are at net zero, then there is still too much carbon in the atmosphere,
Mm.
and that needs to be taken out until we basically have lowered to whatever the exact ppm number is that we then
Mm.
actually want to achieve. But we will need carbon capture methodologies to do this too. And of course, where are we there? I mean, yes, at this stage, a lot of people say it's completely crazy, will never work, it's too expensive. I mean, we do also have a couple of those companies in our portfolio, and we do see, of course, the costs are slowly but surely coming down, but there's still a lot of work. So it's still, the
Mm.
proof is still in the pudding. We haven't been able to do this yet at the cost level that is necessary. So currently, the green premium is still way too high.
Mm.
And then there's, of course, the element of like some people being very critical of, well, there's the direct air capture logic, and then there's sort of the capture at source, where CO2 is being emitted to suck
Mm-hmm.
it out there. That is, of course, more effective already because you have that density of CO2. But a lot of people criticize those types of technologies because they, of course, continue ensuring that, let's say, fossil fuel emitting factories, etc., continue to exist.
Mm.
But I would argue that at least in sectors where it is very hard to abate, but we still, for example, need, let's say, cement, I
Mm-hmm.
would argue it's better to do that for now than not to
Yeah.
do that. But we're still using cement because we haven't found another solution for cement to be produced in a different way. And
Mm.
well, millions of houses are still being built, particularly in, let's say, emerging markets where the built environment is constantly still,
Yeah.
growing. So yeah, those would be my 2 cents on this topic. But I mean, if we're getting into a very technical discussion, I'd much rather have our like super smart investment team that are deeply into the various technologies that would be able, to add a lot more value to the
Mm-hmm.
conversation because they're of course dealing with these technologies on a daily
Mm.
basis and are seeing all the different models out there. So we'll get them in as an expert interview for the next round.
Nice. For the next round, I would love to speak with them.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's kind of interesting because I think that very frequently when we talk about this kind of topics, we always focus on the emission side. So how to lower down the kind of the amount of CO2 that we actually emit. Talking about electric cars, talking about renewables and everything. But there is always the other side of that kind of speech that is, anyway, if we reach net zero, we need to lower it down anyway because it's already there. And it's a kind of argument that is frequently hidden, I would say, or at
Mhm.
least it's less important for many people because it's kind of already present and we should, do something about it.
Definitely.
And I also believe that is one of those technology that could be potentially implemented already right now because we could potentially have a good technology that is able to take it off from the atmosphere right now. Uh,
I mean, like as I said, like the biggest technology that does this is nature. I
yeah.
was I was actually earlier this week. I was at David Attenborough's premiere for
Hmm.
the new film Oceans, and that just like just puts you back into that mindset that actually indeed the oceans captures something like
Yeah.
30% of the CO2 emissions that we emit as humanity every year. And we need to make sure that these natural ecosystems too, next to technology, of course,
Hmm.
play that role of continuously doing this hard work for us.
Yeah.
And to do that, we need to actually ensure that there's sufficient marine reserves, et cetera, that actually ensure that the underworld biodiversity continues to be intact. Because if it's not, and if those oceans at some point acidify, basically we have a
Yeah.
problem. I'm not use the word, but
Let's be polite. Let's say we have a problem.
let's be polite here, but we will have a very big problem. And so that is certainly one of the technologies, nature. But next to nature, we will need additional technologies
Mm.
that take the carbon out of the air, that store it or that utilize it again, right? Like that also, not a lot of, not everyone is aware that you can also do carbon capture and utilization. So
Hmm.
carbon
Yeah.
can actually be used for new products. So for example, out of carbon, you can make, for example, interesting compounds for chemicals, etc. You can, for
Hmm.
example, make sustainable aviation fuel that
Hmm.
then, improves at least the performance of the kerosene from a CO2 perspective. So that's also possible because not everyone is aware that carbon capture and
Yeah.
utilization is also something that can be done.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting concept, to be honest. Maybe it's less covered by, mass media and, wide available information, So you need to deep dive a little bit more on the topic to actually being able to understand this kind of things and to get to know them. Maybe last question from my side, coming back again to your investor side, I would say. Uh, I know that is, let's say, it's a
One
it's
interlude, Michaela,
Mhm,
I would just throw out there for people that want to look up, like for example, in our
sure.
portfolio, there's a company called 12 that does like sustainable aviation fuel in this way. There's another very cool company out there, Infinium, that does this kind of work. So there are really cool companies out there that are doing this work on a daily basis. For anyone that's interested, or also like if you just want to check out
Mhm,
on our website, there are like over 150 companies you can just check out, look at the stories of those individual
mm,
companies and actually see what they're doing. Because sometimes, when we talk about these things in an abstraction, it's it's not the same thing. You sometimes just want
yeah.
to say, oh, this
Seeing
is
that happen in real life is kind of different, Seeing that
exactly.
someone is actually doing that out there is very, very different, I would
Exactly.
say.
And I think that's
Yeah.
what we try to bring to our investors next to just the three things that I said,
Mm,
good return, good climate impact, and like
yeah.
sleeping well at night. We bring them an experience. We give
Mm,
them the opportunity to, through our incredibly beautiful digital platform, to see those hundreds of cool companies that are doing this work on a daily basis. And we give them live updates of how these companies are developing. Oh, company XYZ just signed a deal with Google and they're now going to
mhm.
provide energy to Google. And you get those kinds of updates. You're like, yes, I'm not only depressed because I'm reading the news every day. I can actually, on Carbon Equity's website, see the
Nice.
positive stuff that's happening in the world. And, think, okay, I can be part of this and I can make my contribution.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree. I think that seeing that in real life and seeing real application of those kind of technologies like moving the needle a lot. Because we are always talking about decarbonizing and removing CO2, but no one actually is actually able to see that in real life. And seeing those kind of technology working is actually moving the needle. Last question that I wanted to ask, you partially already answered, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to, let's say, deep dive on this one another time. How, taking the investor side, why someone out there should invest on your product or some product that are investing on the ESG direction, on the environmental direction, instead of putting money in the financial services on any other kind of sector. So why an investor should choose this way instead of adding something else?
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, every investor needs to make their own
Of
decisions,
course.
and I don't want to advise them on anything or tell them that they should do this or the other because, you don't want to get into any regulatory trouble. But
Not a financial advice, absolutely.
this is no financial advice or anything like that. But just taking one step back, right? I mean, like there are various ways of how we can invest. And I think I, first of all, sort of made that differentiation earlier between public market investing, so at
Mm,
the stock exchange, versus private market investing. Well,
mm,
if I'm looking at this type of investing from an impact perspective, I add more value as an investor in the private markets because my money actually there's new money, new additional money being added to companies. Whereas if I'm investing on the stock exchange and I buy a Tesla share,
mhm.
with whatever complicated my thing we might have to say about Tesla
Yeah.
shares, I think I just buy shares from you and I don't
Mhm.
add new value to Tesla. So that I think
Mm,
that's the first thing. Like if you're in any shape or form impact minded, then I think private markets is probably the clearer way to go to actually make a difference. So I think that's the
mm,
first thing. Now, within private markets, most people just don't have access to the top funds. And if you're not in the top funds, you don't make the top returns. As a actually matter of fact, you can of course also lose your money.
sure.
And then in turn, when you're investing in private markets, you want to be in the top funds. You don't have access. Like, what's your way to do that? So, carbon equity has the ability to give you the option to both, make a positive impact by adding more money to the company, by focusing on climate,
Mhm.
by ensuring that we get you into the top funds, because of our sort of annual vintage that where we picked 8 to 10 funds, we're also able to give you an incredible diversification, which is lowering your risk, which is also important. And we create like a basically the product that I explained earlier that, you know, gives you the impact, that gives you a significant financial return that's at par with other venture capital or private equity fund of funds. We have very low fees. We also don't, you know, charge any performance fee or any carry to our investors, but just a small management fee up to 1%. Um, and um, and then, of course, there's a great, let's say, community around our investment. So we have both an online and offline community, and you can actually really look at the. It's not just investing in like a fund of fund is like sounds like the most boring product on this planet, and yet we make this boring planet a product a super exciting product because on the website you can actually see what your
The impact, I would say, of your capital.
yeah, you can
Yeah.
see what your capital is doing for the world while
Great.
making money for yourself. So I hope that was maybe a little bit of a
Yeah.
lengthy, but I think
At the
those
end, at a little bit, the return is always selling, you know.
yeah, no, yeah, and the return is very equivalent to private equity fund of funds. So it's not you're it's kind of like well, if you want to look at it a different way, it's like philanthropy, but you get your money back and a significant return. If you want to see it that way, I
That's a
mean,
very good, you know, that's a very good catchphrase, to be honest. It's a very good one. Saskia, again, it has been a pleasure speaking with you. It was a very, very interesting conversation, and I will follow up carbon equity in the upcoming months to see how you guys are really impacting the world. So thank you very much for joining. It was a real pleasure.
great, Michele. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.